So here I demonstrate this quick project that I put together with the intention of this as being a way that you can search through indexed Python files where the backend vector engine is using Marqo. And then I also combine it with a locally hosted language model that we can use to explain the snippets and search results in a fashion that's similar to retrieval augmented generation, especially if the code that you want to ask a LLM is, say, proprietary and you don't want to expose it to something like ChatGPT. So this whole project has been built and works all locally with everything exposed on different servers, all on the same network. So on my Wi-Fi, I can just navigate to the machine IP address where my services are and I can access it. So the intent of this is for something like an internal part of the organization that you may be working for, and you want to be able to just build up an internal tool to quickly search through code repos or documents or whatever you want and combine it with an LLM. Starting off, it's fairly simple. We just have a search bar that we send a query to the backend for the search results, where I have already indexed these Python files. And these Python files are just from Marqo's GitHub, so I downloaded their repository and indexed it all. And upon successful search, we can click on one of the results and it renders that code file on the browser and navigates us to where we have that hit. In this case, we have this comment, which is a hashtag Marqo web error. And then going through, we see these all are for the user experience to quickly navigate through to the point we're most interested in. And now here, what I'm doing is demonstrating the LLM's capability that I have hosted locally, where I'm asking it to explain this code, and I'll need to wait for a response for it. Now, in this case, I have this model sped up, or I guess the video sped up by 15 times because I'm not using GPU inference, because my home PC where I have the model hosted at the moment doesn't use NVIDIA, it's an AMD. But I have this working on something called Cobalt CPP, which you can Google, and they have a way for you to run this locally with all these new, I guess, local llama models if you explore Reddit. And they have this tool that is a lot more optimized for AMD, which my computer uses, but it's still slow. So what we receive here is a model response explaining the code, and we can see that it gives us a fairly well and verbose output, maybe not to the likes of ChatGPT, but on inspection, at a glance, it looks fairly well. So you can imagine that if you were to fine tune this, then it would be even better. Now here I just demonstrate more of the search capabilities where I go through some more Marqo docs, but then we also see that we have all these app equals fast APIs, which are mainly from the fast API GitHub repo, which I also index into Marqo, but because I didn't choose to optimize the actual indexing, the search, or choosing the appropriate embedding model to create the vector representations of the code, there are a lot of parts where things look a bit interesting in this case. So if you were to just type in where's fast API used, you can imagine you'll get a whole bunch of responses that are not relevant. Now I demonstrate this again where I just look at fast API, and we can see that it is called in many places within the tests code within fast API. Now I also wanted to test out the large language model beyond code explanation, so we can also use it for code generation, which I ask it a very specific and simple tasks to do, which is write me a simple Python 3 program where I also tell it the types and what to do. And we can see that the response, once it is generated, comes out fairly well. I haven't tested this beyond simple tasks due to the response time it takes on my CPU computer. But we can see that this, acting as a proof of concept, demonstrates what is the art of the possible. And when we want to really dive in and give it the best results, from searching to LLM results, this is when I would imagine for future work, you do a lot of fine tuning and optimizations to make sure that if this was a product that I would bring internally or to the consumer, not just something I'm playing around myself, then those are the things that I would look to do. Now, with that all said and done, this code is also exposed here in my public GitHub repo, which you can find in the description below. But what I'm going to show you here is mainly the system architecture for what we saw. So we have this command line interface component that we see at this bottom section, and that handles everything around the language model, which is on this different server, which I connect to because I know what that machine's IP address is, but it's all on my Wi-Fi. So we just ask it a question or just put in anything into the prompt, and it will send back a response that renders, as you saw. Similarly, this Explorer component is connected to an API that I have that's hosted on a separate machine, with its port is exposed at 8000, but the API itself is actually routed to /search, which then points towards the Marqo instance on a different port, and then it retrieves all that data and sends it back and renders it on the Explorer component, which you see here on the left. And then this main component with CodeMirror is what I use to actually render these files directly into the browser. So what happens is that we click on the search result that we want. It finds the file path because I grab the metadata back from the index document, so I get its file path, and I also have that code folder mounted to the Docker image when I spin it up, because everything, as I said before, is hosted locally. So what I wanted was for this to be, if you have some shared network location, say you're on like Windows, then all users on that network can be able to use this service to search through their internal documentation. But in this case, I've had it as internal code, which I find would be very useful, having worked in such organizations before, where data, code, everything is very confidential. But that is about it. If you want to find out more, the link to the GitHub will be here, where you can also see through the README and the front end teaches you how to build it. And similarly on the back end, yeah. Cool, thank you.